The cranberry sauce was still dripping from Uncle Marcus's plate when the black SUVs pulled up to my cousin's driveway. Through the dining room window, I watched as men in dark suits stepped out, earpieces glinting in the afternoon sun. My family, who had spent the last hour mocking my fake government job, suddenly went silent. The same relatives who called me a dreamer, a liar, a wannabe, were about to discover exactly what I really did for a living. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 hours earlier, I had walked through the front door of the Henderson family's sprawling colonial house in Westchester County, carrying a bottle of wine and dreading every step. The familiar scent of roasted turkey and disappointment filled the air as my extended family gathered for our annual tradition of passive-aggressive small talk and thinly veiled criticism. "Well, well, look who finally showed up," my cousin Bradley called out from the kitchen, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for family members he considered beneath him. Bradley worked in finance, drove a BMW, and never let anyone forget either fact. "How's that mysterious government job treating you, Alex?" The emphasis on mysterious wasn't lost on anyone in the room. For the past 2 years, since I'd started my current position, family gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable. When people asked what I did for work, I gave vague answers about federal consulting and security analysis. It wasn't that I wanted to be secretive, I literally couldn't tell them the truth. "It's going well," I replied, setting the wine on the counter and bracing myself for what I knew was coming. Aunt Patricia, Bradley's mother and the family's self-appointed authority on success, emerged from the pantry with a knowing smile. "You know, Alex, your cousin Jessica just got promoted to Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle Communications. She's making 6 figures now." She paused dramatically, adjusting her pearl necklace. "It's wonderful when young people find real careers with legitimate companies." The dig was subtle but unmistakable. Jessica, who was actually 3 years older than my 28, beamed from across the room where she was arranging dinner rolls with unnecessary precision. "That's great for Jessica," I said, genuinely meaning it, though I knew my congratulations would be interpreted as defensive. Uncle Marcus, a man who'd never met a conspiracy theory he didn't embrace, joined the conversation with his usual subtlety. "You sure you're not working for one of those made-up government agencies they create to waste taxpayer money?" "Because I've been doing research. And there's a lot of fake departments out there designed to employ people who can't get real jobs." My younger brother Danny, the only family member who'd ever shown faith in my choices, shot me a sympathetic look from the couch where he was watching football with the other cousins. At 24, he was still in graduate school studying environmental science, which made him another favorite target for the family's, quote, practical career advice. "I work for a real agency, Uncle Marcus," I said, keeping my voice level. "We do important work." "Important work," Bradley repeated, making air quotes. "Right. And what exactly is this important work? Because you've been giving us the runaround for 2 years now." This was the moment I dreaded at every family gathering. The moment when my carefully constructed walls of privacy crumbled under the pressure of familial interrogation. I couldn't tell them I was a threat assessment specialist for a classified division of the Department of Homeland Security. I couldn't explain that my boring desk job involved analyzing intelligence reports, coordinating with international agencies, and sometimes providing security consultation for events that could never be made public. Instead, I had to stand there while they assumed I was either unemployed, working some entry-level position I was embarrassed to admit, or living in a fantasy world where I'd convinced myself my mundane job was more important than it actually was. "I do security consulting," I said, which was technically true but hopelessly inadequate. The room erupted in barely contained laughter. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of amused chuckling reserved for children who claim they're going to be astronauts or professional athletes. "Security consulting?" Aunt Patricia repeated slowly, as if testing the words for believability. "For the government." "That's right." "And they pay you enough to live in that expensive apartment in Arlington?" Jessica asked, her tone suggesting she'd already calculated that my lifestyle exceeded what she assumed my income could support. Before I could answer, my cousin Michael chimed in from the kitchen island where he was carving the turkey with theatrical precision. Michael was a surgeon, And he'd never let anyone forget that either. You know, Alex, there's no shame in working a regular job. Not everyone can handle high-pressure careers. Some people are better suited for simpler work. The condescension was thick enough to cut with the carving knife he was wielding. I felt my face flush, not from embarrassment, but from frustration. These people had known me my entire life. They'd watched me graduate summa cum laude from Georgetown, with degrees in international relations and computer science. They'd seen me turn down lucrative offers from private companies to pursue public service. Yet somehow, because I couldn't share the details of my work, they'd convinced themselves I was either lying about my job or working somewhere insignificant. "It's not that simple," I began, but Bradley cut me off. "Come on, Alex, we're family. You can tell us the truth. Are you working security at a mall? A night watchman somewhere? There's no judgment here." The sad thing was, he probably believed there was no judgment, even as he delivered the question with a smirk that suggested he'd already decided on the answer. Danny stood up from the couch, clearly fed up with the direction of the conversation. "Why don't you all just leave Alex alone? Not everyone needs to broadcast every detail of their job." "We're just curious," Aunt Patricia said with mock innocence. "It's a family dinner. We share what's happening in our lives. Bradley just closed a deal worth $2 million. Jessica got written up in Marketing Weekly. Michael saved 3 lives this week in surgery. We're interested in Alex's life too." The comparison was intentional and brutal. Here were my family members with concrete, quantifiable achievements they could discuss openly, while I sat silent, unable to share anything meaningful about my work. In their minds, my silence could only mean one thing: there was nothing worth sharing. "I appreciate the curiosity," I said carefully, "but some jobs require discretion." Uncle Marcus let out a loud guffaw. "Discretion? Listen to this guy. What are you, a secret agent?" The irony was almost too much to bear. If only he knew how close to the truth he'd accidentally stumbled. "Something like that," I said quietly, which only made them laugh harder. "Right," Bradley said, wiping tears from his eyes. "Our cousin Alex, the international man of mystery, working for the CIA from his cubicle at the Department of Motor Vehicles." Even my grandmother, usually the family peacekeeper, couldn't resist adding her opinion. "Sweetie," she said gently, "it's okay to have a normal job. Your grandfather worked at the post office for 40 years and was proud of it. Honest work is nothing to be ashamed of." The assumption that I was ashamed, that I was compensating for some perceived inadequacy in my career, stung more than the outright mockery. I'd dedicated my life to protecting people, to preventing threats they would never know existed, and my own family had concluded I was either a liar or a failure. "I'm proud of my work," I said, standing up from the dinner table. "I'm proud of what I do and the people I work with." "Then tell us what it is," Jessica challenged. "If you're so proud, why the big secret?" I looked around the room at faces I'd known since childhood, people who'd celebrated my birthdays and graduations, who'd cheered for me at soccer games and school plays. People who now looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, convinced they were dealing with a family member who'd either lost touch with reality or was deliberately deceiving them about his life. The worst part was understanding their perspective. From the outside, my behavior probably did seem suspicious. I couldn't talk about my colleagues, my projects, or even my daily routine. I traveled frequently but couldn't discuss where or why. I lived comfortably but couldn't explain the source of my income in terms they could verify or understand. But what they didn't understand was that some secrets aren't kept out of shame or pretense. Some secrets are kept because lives depend on them. Some work happens in the shadows not because it's less important, but because it's so important that it can't be discussed over turkey and stuffing at a family dinner. As I stood there trying to decide whether to leave early or endure another hour of subtle humiliation, my phone buzzed against my hip. A text message from my supervisor, Director Sarah Chen. "Code Orange, Highland Park. Need you on site immediately. Security detail compromised." My blood ran cold. Highland Park was less than 20 minutes from where we were sitting. Code Orange meant an active threat to a protected individual. And a compromised security detail meant someone very important was in danger. I was already reaching for my jacket when the first black SUV pulled into the driveway. The conversation around the dinner table came to an abrupt halt as car doors slammed outside. Through the lace curtains of the Henderson family dining room, we could all see the convoy of black vehicles that had materialized in the suburban driveway like something out of a movie. "What the hell?" Uncle Marcus muttered, setting down his wine glass and moving toward the window. My phone was already buzzing with another message as I pulled on my jacket. This time it was a call from Agent Rodriguez, my direct contact with the protective detail. "Martinez, we've got a situation." His voice was tense through the earpiece I'd quickly inserted. "Senator Williams was at Highland Park Mall when we detected suspicious activity. Possible assassination attempt. We've moved him to a secure location, but we need immediate threat assessment and backup coordination." My family was still staring out the window, confused and increasingly alarmed as more agents emerged from the vehicles. I could see the distinctive silhouettes of their tactical gear beneath their suits, the subtle but unmistakable bulges of concealed weapons. "I'll be right there," I said into the phone, then turned to face my family. "I have to go." "Go?" Aunt Patricia's voice pitched higher. "Alex, what's happening? Who are those people?" Before I could answer, there was a firm knock at the front door, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for permission to enter. Bradley, still holding his carving knife, looked between me and the door with growing panic. Did you call the police? Is this some kind of joke?" The knock came again, more insistent this time. I could hear my cousin's 3 young children starting to cry upstairs, frightened by the sudden change in atmosphere. "I need everyone to stay calm," I said, moving toward the door. "These are federal agents, and they're here for me." "Federal agents?" Jessica's voice cracked. "Alex, what did you do?" The assumption that I'd done something wrong, that law enforcement showing up at our family dinner must mean I was in trouble, would have been laughable if the situation weren't so serious. Even now, faced with concrete evidence that my work was legitimate, their first instinct was to assume I was a criminal. I opened the door to find Agent Sarah Murphy, a woman I'd worked with on dozens of operations over the past 2 years. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gray eyes were all business. "Agent Martinez," she said formally, then lowered her voice. "We need you now. The situation's escalating." Behind her, I could see at least 4 other agents positioned around the property, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Neighbors were beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the unusual activity on the quiet residential street. "Give me 2 minutes," I told her, then turned back to my family, who were now clustered in the doorway like tourists at a zoo, staring at the agents with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Agent Martinez?" Aunt Patricia repeated slowly, as if the words didn't make sense in her mouth. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I pulled out my federal identification, something I'd never shown to any of them before. The badge and credentials that identified me as Alexander J. Martinez, Special Agent, Department of Homeland Security, Threat Assessment Division. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced at a family gathering. Uncle Marcus, who moments earlier had been joking about my fake government job, was staring at my credentials as if they might dissolve before his eyes. "This is real," Danny said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. He was the first to understand what he was looking at. "Very real," Agent Murphy confirmed from the doorway. She glanced at her watch. "Agent Martinez, we really need to move." Bradley set down his carving knife with shaking hands. You work for Homeland Security?" "Threat Assessment Division," I confirmed, pocketing my credentials. "And right now, there's a United States Senator whose life may be in danger. That's why I have to leave." The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. These people who had spent years dismissing my career, who had assumed I was either lying or working some insignificant job, were suddenly confronted with the reality that I was responsible for protecting high-level government officials. Jessica was the first to find her voice. But you never said anything. You let us think." "I let you think what you wanted to think," I said, grabbing my keys from the side table. "I couldn't tell you what I really did, because classified information stays classified, even at family dinners." Michael, the surgeon who had lectured me about simpler work 20 minutes earlier, looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "How long have you been doing this?" 3 years, I said, ever since I left graduate school. Graduate school? Aunt Patricia sounded confused. But you said you only had undergraduate degrees. I paused at the door, realizing how many lies of omission I'd been forced to tell over the years. I have a master's in counterterrorism and homeland security from Georgetown, and I'm finishing my PhD in international security studies. I also speak 4 languages and hold certifications in threat analysis, cybersecurity, and crisis management. The list of qualifications hung in the air like an accusation. All those times they'd suggested I needed to get serious about my career, all those comparisons to my more successful cousins, all those assumptions about my capabilities and ambitions. Agent Martinez, Murphy said more firmly from the doorway, we have a potential Code Red situation developing. Code Red. That meant an imminent threat to life. Senator Williams wasn't just in danger anymore. Someone was actively trying to kill him. I have to go, I said, moving toward the door. I'll explain everything later. Wait, my grandmother called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. At 84, she was the only family member who didn't look shocked or confused. Instead, she looked proud. You're going to save someone's life, aren't you? I turned back to see her standing in the center of the room, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, who were still processing what they'd just learned. Her eyes were bright with understanding and something that might have been respect. That's the plan, Grandma. She nodded slowly. Then you'd better go do it. As I walked toward Agent Murphy, I heard Uncle Marcus mutter behind me, Jesus Christ, he's actually a secret agent. Not secret, I corrected without turning around. Classified, there's a difference. The ride to Highland Park Mall took exactly 12 minutes, during which Agent Murphy briefed me on the situation. Senator Robert Williams, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had been making a routine stop at the mall to pick up a gift for his granddaughter when surveillance detected 3 individuals conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance on his security detail. 2 of them are still unaccounted for, Murphy explained as we weaved through traffic with emergency lights flashing. The 3rd one we picked up trying to plant something in the parking garage. Turns out to be a known associate of a domestic terrorist cell we've been tracking. I pulled up the threat assessment files on my tablet, cross-referencing known associates and potential targets. Senator Williams had been receiving death threats for months due to his work on a controversial counterterrorism bill. Our division had been monitoring the situation, but this was the first time the threats had escalated to direct action. Current location of the senator? I asked, already formulating contingency plans. Safe house designation Charlie 7. But we think they might have compromised that location too. We need a full threat assessment and alternative extraction routes. The mall parking lot was swarming with law enforcement when we arrived. Local police had cordoned off a 2-block radius, while federal agents coordinated with mall security to evacuate civilians and secure potential evidence. Agent Rodriguez approached our vehicle as soon as we stopped. Martinez, thank God, we've got a problem. He led us toward a white van that had been isolated in the center of the parking lot. Bomb disposal technicians were carefully examining what appeared to be electronic equipment visible through the windows. The device they planted in the parking garage was a decoy, Rodriguez explained. This van contains the real threat. Looks like they were planning a coordinated attack, distraction device to draw security away from the senator, then detonate the main device when his detail moved to the backup location. I studied the van, taking in the positioning, the sight lines to the mall entrances, the proximity to potential escape routes. These weren't amateur terrorists acting on impulse. This was a sophisticated operation that had been planned for weeks, possibly months. They knew his schedule, I said, thinking out loud. They knew his security protocols. And they knew enough about our procedures to plan countermeasures. Murphy nodded grimly. That's what we're thinking, which means we might be dealing with inside information. The possibility of a security breach within our own ranks added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. If someone with access to classified information was feeding intelligence to terrorists, then nowhere was truly safe. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Are you okay? The news is showing helicopters over Highland Park Mall. I realized that what had started as a family dinner embarrassment had now become a major news story. By tomorrow, everyone would know that a plot to assassinate Senator Williams had been thwarted. But they would never know the details of how it happened or who had prevented it. Just like my family had never known, until today, what I really did for a living. The mobile command center had been set up in the back of an unmarked truck parked 3 blocks from Highland Park Mall. Inside, banks of monitors displayed real-time surveillance footage, thermal imaging, and communication intercepts from multiple agencies. I slipped on a headset and immediately plugged into the data stream I'd been analyzing for months. "Talk to me about the domestic cell," I said to Agent Chen, our intelligence liaison who had arrived from D.C. just 20 minutes after the initial alert. She pulled up a series of photographs on the main screen. The Patriots' Dawn Coalition, anti-government extremists led by a man named Trevor Hutchins. Former military, dishonorably discharged after threatening a superior officer. He's been recruiting through encrypted forums and planning what he calls, quote, direct action against federal officials. I studied the surveillance photos, cross-referencing them with the psychological profiles I'd been building. The timing isn't coincidental. Senator Williams' committee is voting on the Enhanced Domestic Security Act next week. If they eliminate him, they delay the vote and send a message to other supporters. That's our assessment too, Chen agreed. But here's what concerns me. The level of operational security they've demonstrated suggests professional training. Military or intelligence background. Agent Murphy approached with a tablet displaying intercepted communications. We've been monitoring their encrypted channels for the past 6 months. Most of it was standard anti-government rhetoric, but 3 weeks ago the communications shifted. Someone new joined their group, someone with access to detailed information about federal security protocols. I scrolled through the intercepts, noting the change in sophistication and tactical awareness. This isn't just inside information. This is someone with direct operational experience. They know how we think, how we respond to threats. Which means they'll anticipate our standard containment procedures, Rodriguez said grimly. They might already be adapting to our current positioning. The realization sent a chill through the command center. We weren't just dealing with terrorists. We were dealing with terrorists who had been coached by someone from within our own community. Someone who understood our strengths and, more importantly, our vulnerabilities. My phone rang. Director Chen's number appeared on the screen. "Martinez, I need a full threat assessment in the next 10 minutes. Her voice was tight with urgency. "The president is demanding answers, and the senator's family is being moved to secure locations. What are we looking at?" I pulled up my analysis software, feeding in all the data we'd collected over the past hour. Location patterns, communication intercepts, known associates, behavioral predictors. Everything went into the algorithm I'd been developing for exactly this type of situation. "Ma'am, based on current intelligence, this isn't their primary objective," I said, watching the probability matrices populate on my screen. "The mall attack was designed to fail. They wanted us to find the van, wanted us to mobilize our resources here." Silence on the line. Then, "Explain." "They're drawing us away from the senator's actual location. The safe house designation wasn't compromised by accident. They leaked it deliberately. They want us to think Charlie 7 is blown, so we'll move him to DELTA 2, which is where they're really planning to strike." I could hear Director Chen typing rapidly in the background. "Delta 2 is the Fairfax County facility. That's where we moved him 20 minutes ago." The blood drained from my face. While we'd been analyzing the decoy operation at the mall, the real attack was already in motion at the secure facility, where we'd taken Senator Williams to keep him safe. "Ma'am, we need to contact the Delta 2 team immediately. They're walking into a trap." "Already trying. Communications went dark 3 minutes ago." Agent Murphy was monitoring multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, coordinating with local law enforcement and federal backup units. But in a situation like this, 3 minutes of radio silence meant the difference between a successful rescue and a national tragedy. I was already running calculations on response times and tactical options when my personal phone buzzed with another text from Danny. "Mom called. She saw you on the news." The whole family is watching CNN. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. While I was trying to prevent the assassination of a United States senator, my family was sitting in Bradley's living room watching news coverage of an operation I couldn't discuss. Finally understanding that the cousin they'd been mocking for years was actually in the middle of saving someone's life. Rodriguez, I need a tactical team and helicopter transport to Fairfax County, now. Martinez, your threat assessment, not tactical response, he protested. The tactical team doesn't know this terrorist cell like I do. I've been studying their patterns for 8 months. I know how they think, how they operate. And right now I might be the only person who can predict their next move. Agent Chen looked up from her communication attempts. He's right. Martinez has been lead analyst on the Patriots' Dawn file. If anyone can anticipate their strategy, it's him. The helicopter ride to Fairfax County took 12 minutes, during which I reviewed everything we knew about Trevor Hutchins and his organization. The man was methodical, patient, and absolutely convinced that eliminating federal officials was not just justified but necessary for what he called American freedom. More troubling was the intelligence suggesting that someone with high-level security clearance had been feeding him information. The precision of this operation, the detailed knowledge of our procedures, the ability to predict our responses, it all pointed to a level of inside access that should have been impossible. As we approached the Delta II facility, I could see smoke rising from one of the buildings. The secure communications tower had been destroyed, which explained why we'd lost contact with the protective detail. Emergency vehicles were converging on the scene, but the careful positioning of the attack vehicles told me the terrorists had planned for this response too. There, I said, pointing to a cluster of trees about 800 meters from the main building. That's where they'll have their sniper positioned. High ground, clear sight lines, multiple escape routes through the forest preserve. The helicopter pilot adjusted our approach vector to avoid the potential threat zone while I coordinated with the tactical team on the ground. Through my headset, I could hear fragments of communication from the facility. Senator Williams was alive but trapped in a secure room, while his protective detail engaged multiple attackers. Martinez, we need options, came Director Chen's voice through the radio. The senator's security team is pinned down, and we can't get back up into the building without exposing them to sniper fire. I studied the facility layout on my tablet, overlaying it with thermal imaging from our surveillance drones. The attack pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a siege designed to draw maximum attention and create a prolonged standoff. They don't want to kill him quickly, I realized. They want a spectacle, they want news coverage, they want to demonstrate that federal officials aren't safe anywhere. The longer this goes on, the more successful they consider it. But that psychological insight also revealed their weakness. If they wanted a prolonged engagement, they would have planned for extended operations, which meant supply lines, communication protocols, and predetermined extraction procedures. I need access to the facility blueprints and the surrounding topographical surveys, I said. And get me a direct line to whoever's in charge of the senator's protective detail inside. Agent Thompson, the tactical team leader, handed me his communication device. Agent Martinez, this is Agent Foster, inside the facility. We've got the senator secured, but we're taking fire from multiple positions. We count at least 6 shooters, and they seem to know the building layout. Agent Foster, this is Martinez from Threat Assessment. I need you to describe exactly what happened when the attack began. They hit the communications tower first, then used some kind of electronic jamming device to disrupt our radio contact. But here's the strange part. They announced themselves before opening fire, like they wanted us to know who was attacking. That confirmed my analysis. This was political theater, as much as it was an assassination attempt. But it also gave us an advantage. Terrorists who cared more about their message than operational efficiency made predictable mistakes. Foster, I'm going to walk you through a way to get the senator out of there, but I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. As I began coordinating the rescue operation, my phone buzzed with a message from Uncle Marcus. Alex, your grandmother wants to know if you're safe. We're all watching the news. We're proud of you. For the first time in hours, I smiled. After years of being dismissed and doubted by my own family, they were finally seeing what I'd been trying to protect them from knowing. The work that happened in the shadows, the threats that were neutralized before they could harm innocent people, the daily responsibility of standing between democracy and those who would destroy it. But there wasn't time to process the emotional significance of that moment. Senator Williams was still trapped, terrorists were still shooting, and I was the only person in the operational theater who understood their strategy well enough to counter it. "All right, Foster," I said into the radio, "here's how we're going to get your protectee out alive." "Foster, the building's HVAC system has maintenance tunnels that connect to the parking garage," I said, pulling up the facility schematics on my tablet while coordinating with 3 different tactical teams. "The terrorists won't expect an extraction through the basement level because it requires knowledge of the building's infrastructure." "Copy that, Martinez. But we'd need to move the senator down 2 floors while under fire." I studied the thermal imaging feed from our drones, tracking the heat signatures of the attacker's position throughout the facility. "Negative. You're going to create a diversion on the 3rd floor while I enter through the parking garage and extract the senator from below." "Martinez, you're not tactical," Agent Thompson interrupted over the radio. "You're a desk analyst." The assumption stung, but there wasn't time to argue about my field qualifications. What Thompson didn't know was that threat assessment specialists in my division weren't just analysts. We were cross-trained in tactical operations, specifically for situations like this. When you understand how terrorists think, sometimes you're the only person who can predict where they won't be looking. "Thompson, I've been inside this facility for training exercises. I know the layout, I know the security protocols, and I know this terrorist cell better than anyone else in the operational theater. Foster, how many rounds do you have left?" "Maybe 40 between the 3 of us," Foster replied, and the senator took a fragment in his shoulder when they breached the outer perimeter. Senator Williams was wounded. That changed everything. A mobile extraction through the HVAC tunnels was no longer viable if he couldn't move under his own power. I recalculated our options, factoring in the senator's injury, the terrorists' positioning, and the time constraints we were working under. Every minute we delayed gave them more opportunity to either kill their target or escape to execute backup plans we might not have discovered. "New plan," I said, switching to a direct channel with the helicopter pilot. "Set us down on the roof. I'm going in through the skylight access." "Martinez, that's suicide," Director Chen's voice crackled through my earpiece. "They'll have that approach covered." "No, they won't," I replied, studying the drone footage more carefully. "Look at their positioning. They're focused on ground-level approaches and the main stairwells. The roof access hasn't been used in years. It's not even marked on the current building plans. They're working off outdated intelligence." It was a calculated risk based on my analysis of how Trevor Hutchins operated. He was methodical and thorough, but he relied heavily on conventional tactical thinking. He would position his people where he expected law enforcement to approach, not where someone with intimate knowledge of the building might enter. The helicopter touched down on the roof with barely a sound. I slipped out, carrying a tactical pack with everything I'd need for a solo extraction: rappelling gear, medical supplies, and a communication device that would let me coordinate with Foster's team inside. The skylight access was exactly where the old building plans indicated it would be, a maintenance hatch designed for HVAC repairs that connected directly to the senator's current location on the 2nd floor. But as I prepared to descend, my earpiece crackled with an unexpected transmission. "This is Phoenix Base to all operational units. We have a problem." Phoenix Base was our code name for the main intelligence coordination center in Washington. If they were breaking radio silence during an active operation, something had gone seriously wrong. "Phoenix Base, this is Martinez. What's the situation?" "Martinez, we've identified the source of the intelligence leak. Agent David Kellerman from the Senator's regular protective detail has been feeding information to the Patriots' Dawn Coalition for the past 4 months." Agent Kellerman. I knew him, a 15-year veteran with an exemplary service record and top-level security clearance, the last person anyone would suspect of treason. "Where is Kellerman now?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. "He called in sick this morning, wasn't supposed to be on duty today. But Martinez, he's not at home. His car was spotted 2 miles from your current location 20 minutes ago. The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Kellerman hadn't just provided intelligence to the terrorists, he was actively participating in the operation. He knew every detail of Senator Williams' security protocols, every contingency plan, every safe room and escape route. Foster, this is Martinez. I need you to listen carefully. Agent David Kellerman is compromised. If he approaches your position, do not allow him access to the senator. Kellerman? Foster's voice was confused. He's not here. He's off duty today. That's what he wants you to think. He may be trying to gain access to your location right now. I was halfway through the skylight when I heard footsteps on the floor below, measured, professional footsteps that belonged to someone who knew exactly where they were going. Through my night vision scope, I could see a figure in tactical gear approaching the secure room where Foster's team was protecting the senator. The figure was moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone who wouldn't be challenged by the protective detail until it was too late. Agent Kellerman was about to walk directly into the room where they were holding Senator Williams, and Foster's team would assume he was backup, arriving to help with the evacuation. Foster, do not allow anyone into that room unless they provide the current operational code word, I radioed urgently. What's the current code word? Foster asked. I realized with horror that I didn't know. Operational codes were changed every 6 hours, and I'd been focused on threat assessment rather than protective protocol updates. But Agent Kellerman would know the code, or he would know how to fake his way past a protective detail that trusted him. Foster, the code word is... I paused, thinking frantically. If Kellerman had been feeding intelligence to the terrorists, he might also be monitoring our radio communications. Anything I said could be intercepted. Instead, I took a different approach. Foster, ask him about the Thanksgiving dinner incident from 2019. What? Just ask him. If he's really Agent Kellerman, he'll know what you're talking about. If he doesn't respond correctly, shoot him. It was a gamble based on the fact that federal agents often shared stories about their personal lives during long protective details. If Kellerman was really who he claimed to be, he would remember the story he'd told about accidentally spilling cranberry sauce on his nephew during a family dinner, and having to explain to his sister why he was carrying 3 different concealed weapons. Through my scope, I watched the figure approach Foster's position. I could see the tactical team inside the secure room, weapons drawn but held low, uncertain about whether to trust the man approaching their perimeter. This is Agent Kellerman, a familiar voice said over the radio. I'm here to assist with the extraction. What's your status? Foster's response was cautious but not hostile. Copy that, Agent Kellerman. What's the protocol for the Thanksgiving dinner incident? There was a pause. A long pause that confirmed everything I'd suspected. I'm not sure what you're referring to, came the reply. We need to move the senator now. The terrorists are about to breach this floor. Foster's training kicked in. Step away from the door, Kellerman. Keep your hands visible. Foster, what the hell are you doing? I'm here to help. But the voice was wrong. The inflection, the tone, the way he pronounced Foster's name, it wasn't the Agent Kellerman I'd worked with on previous operations. This was Trevor Hutchins himself, wearing stolen federal gear and using Kellerman's identity to get close enough to assassinate Senator Williams personally. Foster, that is not Agent Kellerman, I said into my radio. That is the primary target, Trevor Hutchins. Engage immediately. Gunfire erupted on the floor below me as I dropped through the skylight into the chaos of the active firefight. Hutchins had abandoned his deception and was now shooting his way toward the senator's location, while his accomplices provided covering fire from multiple positions throughout the building. I landed behind cover just as bullets shattered the fluorescent lights above my head. Through the darkness and smoke, I could see muzzle flashes from at least 4 different positions. Foster's team was pinned down, the senator was wounded, and the primary terrorist was now inside the secure perimeter. This was the moment that would define not just the success of the operation, but the survival of everyone in that building. And despite all the training, all the analysis, all the careful planning, it was going to come down to split-second decisions made in the middle of a gunfight. My phone buzzed with a text message from Danny. The president is about to make a statement. They're saying a federal agent is inside the building trying to save the senator. Everyone knows it's you." For a brief moment, I thought about my family watching the news coverage, finally understanding that their cousin wasn't just making up stories about his important government job. But there wasn't time to process that emotional victory. Senator Williams was still in danger, and I was the only person in position to do something about it. I checked my weapon, took a deep breath, and moved toward the sound of gunfire. The hallway was a maze of broken glass and overturned furniture as I moved toward Foster's position. Through my tactical earpiece, I could hear the firefight intensifying, punctuated by Foster's urgent updates on the senator's deteriorating condition. "Martinez, Williams is losing blood fast," Foster radioed. "We need medical evacuation in the next 10 minutes or we're going to lose him." Trevor Hutchins had positioned himself behind an overturned desk about 30 feet from the secure room, using stolen federal equipment to maintain radio contact with his accomplices throughout the building. What he didn't realize was that our communication systems were designed with encryption protocols that changed every 20 minutes, and his stolen radio was about to become useless. I activated my override codes, switching all federal communications to Emergency Protocol 7. Immediately, Hutchins' radio went silent, cutting him off from his team and disrupting their coordinated attack. "What the hell?" I heard him mutter from behind his cover position. That moment of confusion gave me the opening I needed. I emerged from behind a concrete pillar and had a clear shot at Hutchins' position. But as I raised my weapon, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. One of his accomplices had flanked around through the adjacent office space and was aiming directly at me. The shot that saved my life came from an unexpected direction. Agent Foster had left the senator's secure room and positioned himself to provide covering fire, despite direct orders to maintain defensive positions only. "Foster, get back to your protectee," I shouted, but it was too late. Hutchins had used Foster's movement as an opportunity to advance toward the secure room, where Senator Williams was trapped with only 2 remaining protective agents. I pursued Hutchins down the corridor, using the building's layout to my advantage. This was where months of studying terrorist psychology intersected with tactical reality. Hutchins was operating on pure adrenaline now, his careful planning replaced by desperate improvisation. That made him dangerous, but also predictable. He would try to reach the senator through the most direct route possible, abandoning the strategic patience that had defined his operation up to this point. Which meant he would take the main corridor instead of the safer but longer route through the office spaces. I reached the intersection first, positioning myself with a clear line of sight to the secure room entrance. When Hutchins rounded the corner, weapon raised and focused entirely on his target, I was ready for him. "Trevor Hutchins, federal agent, drop your weapon!" He spun toward me, and for a moment we faced each other across 20 feet of bullet-scarred hallway. This was the man I'd been analyzing for 8 months, whose psychological profile I'd studied until I could predict his responses to different scenarios. But profiles and psychological analysis meant nothing in a direct confrontation, where split-second reactions determined who lived and who died. "You have no idea what you're protecting," Hutchins said, his weapon still trained on me. "Williams and his committee are destroying everything this country was built on." "What I'm protecting is the rule of law," I replied, keeping my own weapon steady. "The principle that political disagreements don't get settled with bullets." "Political disagreements?" Hutchins laughed bitterly. "This isn't politics. This is survival. The federal government has become a cancer, and Williams is one of the tumors." Through my earpiece, I could hear backup teams finally breaching the lower floors of the building. But they were still minutes away from reaching our location, and Senator Williams was running out of time. The medical team couldn't begin treatment until the building was secured, and the building couldn't be secured until Hutchins and his remaining accomplices were neutralized. "It's over, Hutchins," I said. "Your team is scattered, your communications are down, and federal reinforcements are surrounding the building. Surrender now, and you'll live to see trial." "Trial?" He shook his head. "You think I'm afraid of dying for my beliefs? I've been ready to die for this cause since the day I started planning it." That's when I realized the fundamental flaw in my psychological assessment. I'd been treating Hutchins like a rational actor who could be negotiated with, reasoned with, or intimidated into surrender. But true believers don't respond to logic or self-preservation. They respond to the opportunity to become martyrs for their cause. Hutchins wasn't planning to escape. He was planning to die in this hallway, but not before completing his mission to assassinate Senator Williams, which meant he had nothing to lose and no reason to hesitate. The gunfight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds but felt like 30 minutes. Hutchins moved with the desperation of someone who knew he was going to die, while I moved with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to miss. We traded shots across the corridor, using doorways and overturned furniture for cover, each of us looking for the opening that would end the confrontation. My advantage came from tactical training and superior positioning. His advantage came from psychological preparation for death and the reckless courage that comes with having nothing left to lose. The shot that ended it came when Hutchins made a final desperate rush toward the secure room, abandoning cover in a last attempt to reach his target. I caught him center mass at 12 feet, and he went down hard, his weapon skittering across the polished floor. But even as he fell, I could see his hand reaching for something attached to his tactical vest, a detonation device. In his final moments, Trevor Hutchins was trying to trigger explosives that would kill everyone in the immediate area, including Senator Williams, the protective detail, and me. I reached him just as his finger found the trigger, and we struggled for control of the device while blood from his gunshot wound pooled beneath us on the floor. For a moment that stretched into eternity, our faces were inches apart, and I could see the fanatical determination in his eyes even as his life drained away. "You can't stop all of us," he whispered. "There are others. This is just the beginning." Then Agent Foster was beside me, helping to secure the detonation device, while medical teams rushed toward the secure room where Senator Williams was waiting for treatment. The immediate threat was over, but Hutchins' final words echoed in my mind. How many other cells were out there? How many other Trevor Hutchins were planning similar attacks? My phone buzzed with another message from Danny. "The president just announced that the threat has been neutralized, and Senator Williams is safe. Mom is crying. Uncle Marcus keeps saying, 'I can't believe our Alex did this.'" He spun toward me, and for a moment we faced each other across 20 feet of bullet-scarred hallway. This was the man I'd been analyzing for 8 months, whose psychological profile I'd studied until I could predict his responses to different scenarios. But profiles and psychological analysis meant nothing in a direct confrontation, where split-second reactions determined who lived and who died. "You have no idea what you're protecting," Hutchins said, his weapon still trained on me. "Williams and his committee are destroying everything this country was built on." "What I'm protecting is the rule of law," I replied, keeping my own weapon steady. "The principle that political disagreements don't get settled with bullets." "Political disagreements?" Hutchins laughed bitterly. "This isn't politics. This is survival. The federal government has become a cancer, and Williams is one of the tumors." Through my earpiece, I could hear backup teams finally breaching the lower floors of the building. But they were still minutes away from reaching our location, and Senator Williams was running out of time. The medical team couldn't begin treatment until the building was secured, and the building couldn't be secured until Hutchins and his remaining accomplices were neutralized. "It's over, Hutchins," I said. "Your team is scattered, your communications are down, and federal reinforcements are surrounding the building. Surrender now, and you'll live to see trial." "Trial?" He shook his head. "You think I'm afraid of dying for my beliefs? I've been ready to die for this cause since the day I started planning it." That's when I realized the fundamental flaw in my psychological assessment. I'd been treating Hutchins like a rational actor who could be negotiated with, reasoned with, or intimidated into surrender. But true believers don't respond to logic or self-preservation. They respond to the opportunity to become martyrs for their cause. Hutchins wasn't planning to escape. He was planning to die in this hallway, but not before completing his mission to assassinate Senator Williams, which meant he had nothing to lose and no reason to hesitate. The gunfight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds but felt like 30 minutes. Hutchins moved with the desperation of someone who knew he was going to die, while I moved with the precision of someone who couldn't afford to miss. We traded shots across the corridor, using doorways and overturned furniture for cover, each of us looking for the opening that would end the confrontation. My advantage came from tactical training and superior positioning. His advantage came from psychological preparation for death and the reckless courage that comes with having nothing left to lose. The shot that ended it came when Hutchins made a final desperate rush toward the secure room, abandoning cover in a last attempt to reach his target. I caught him center mass at 12 feet, and he went down hard, his weapon skittering across the polished floor. But even as he fell, I could see his hand reaching for something attached to his tactical vest, a detonation device. In his final moments, Trevor Hutchins was trying to trigger explosives that would kill everyone in the immediate area, including Senator Williams, the protective detail, and me. I reached him just as his finger found the trigger, and we struggled for control of the device while blood from his gunshot wound pooled beneath us on the floor. For a moment that stretched into eternity, our faces were inches apart, and I could see the fanatical determination in his eyes even as his life drained away. "You can't stop all of us," he whispered. "There are others. This is just the beginning." Then Agent Foster was beside me, helping to secure the detonation device, while medical teams rushed toward the secure room where Senator Williams was waiting for treatment. The immediate threat was over, but Hutchins' final words echoed in my mind. How many other cells were out there? How many other Trevor Hutchins were planning similar attacks? My phone buzzed with another message from Danny. "The president just announced that the threat has been neutralized, and Senator Williams is safe. Mom is crying. Uncle Marcus keeps saying, 'I can't believe our Alex did this.'" Our Alex. After years of being dismissed as the family member who couldn't get a real job, I had become our Alex, the cousin who had saved a senator's life and prevented what could have been a national tragedy. But there wasn't time to process the emotional significance of that transformation. As emergency medical teams worked to stabilize Senator Williams and crime scene investigators began documenting the evidence, I was already thinking about the investigation that would follow. Hutchins had mentioned other cells, other threats. Agent Kellerman was still missing, along with classified information that could be used to plan future attacks. The Thanksgiving dinner that had started with my family mocking my mysterious government job was ending with news helicopters circling overhead and federal agencies coordinating the largest domestic terrorism investigation in years. And somewhere in that chaos, I realized that my family's perception of me had changed forever. They would never again question whether my work was important or whether my career was legitimate. They had seen the evidence on national television, watched as federal agents treated me as an expert rather than an imposter, witnessed the moment when their assumptions about my life collided with reality. Agent Rodriguez approached as I was giving my preliminary report to the scene commander. "Martinez, the director wants to see you in Washington tomorrow morning. There's going to be a full debrief on how we missed the intelligence leak and what it means for ongoing operations." I nodded, still processing everything that had happened in the past 6 hours. This morning I had been sitting at a family dinner, enduring jokes about my fictional government job. Tonight I would be writing reports that would shape national security policy for years to come. As I walked toward the evacuation helicopter that would take me back to the command center, my phone rang. Bradley's number appeared on the screen. "Alex?" His voice was subdued, completely different from the mocking tone he'd used at dinner. "We saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said, looking back at the building where Senator Williams' life had hung in the balance just minutes earlier. "We owe you an apology," Bradley continued. "All of us. We had no idea what you really did for work." "You couldn't have known," I replied. "That was the point." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Grandma wants to know if you'll still come back for dessert." Despite everything that had happened, I found myself smiling. Even after a terrorist attack and a federal investigation, my grandmother was still worried about whether her family would be together for pie. "Tell her I'll be there," I said. "It might be late, but I'll be there." Because that's what family means. They're still there for you, even after they discover that everything they thought they knew about you was wrong. It was nearly midnight when I finally pulled into Bradley's driveway for the second time that day. The black SUVs were gone, replaced by the familiar sight of my family's cars still parked where they'd been hours earlier. Through the living room windows, I could see the warm glow of table lamps and the flicker of the television broadcasting late-night news coverage. The front door opened before I could knock. Danny stood there, still wearing his football jersey from earlier, but his expression had changed completely. Where there had been casual indifference that afternoon, now there was something approaching awe. "The whole neighborhood has been calling," he said quietly. Mrs. Peterson from next door saw the news and recognized our address from when the agents were here. She wanted to know if we were related to the federal agent who saved Senator Williams. I stepped inside to find my entire extended family still gathered in the living room, but the atmosphere was utterly transformed. The turkey carcass remained on the dining room table, cranberry sauce still stained the tablecloth, but the people sitting around that table were looking at me like they'd never seen me before. Uncle Marcus was the first to speak, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. "Alex, we need to talk about what happened today, about what we said to you." "No, we don't," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "You couldn't have known what I really did. The whole point of classified work is that even the people closest to you can't know the details." Aunt Patricia, who had spent dinner comparing my mysterious career unfavorably to Jessica's marketing success, looked like she'd been crying. "But we should have trusted you. We should have believed that you wouldn't lie to us about something important." The room fell silent except for the television, where CNN was running a continuous loop of footage from Highland Park Mall and the Fairfax County facility. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Domestic terrorism plot, foiled by federal agents." Grandma, who had been the only family member to show faith in me earlier, sat in her usual chair by the window, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I told them you were going to save someone's life," she said. "I just knew it." "How did you know, Grandma?" Jessica asked. She'd been uncharacteristically quiet since I'd walked in, her earlier confidence about her own career success tempered by the realization that marketing campaigns seemed insignificant compared to preventing assassinations. "Because Alex has always been the one who stood up for people," Grandma replied. "When you were all children, if someone was being picked on at school, Alex was the one who stepped in. If there was a problem that needed solving, Alex was the one who figured out how to fix it. I didn't know exactly what job he had, but I knew it would be something that mattered." Bradley cleared his throat awkwardly. "Alex, about what I said earlier, about your job being fake." "Bradley, it's okay," I interrupted. "From your perspective, it did seem fake. I couldn't explain what I did, I couldn't talk about my colleagues or my projects. I understand why you drew the conclusions you drew." "But that's just it," Michael said, speaking for the first time since I'd returned. "We didn't just draw conclusions. We decided you were lying or failing, and we made jokes about it. We made you feel bad about work that was literally protecting people's lives." The weight of that realization settled over the room. For 2 years, while I'd been analyzing terrorist threats and preventing attacks they would never hear about, my own family had been treating me like a disappointment. Every family gathering had become an exercise in defending myself against people who assumed the worst about my life and career. "The thing is," I said, sitting down on the couch between Danny and my cousin Sarah, "I wanted to tell you. There were so many times I wanted to explain what I really did, especially when you'd ask about my work or make jokes about my mysterious government job. But there are rules about disclosure, even to family members." "What kind of rules?" Sarah asked. She was a lawyer, and I could see her legal mind trying to process the ethical implications of my situation. "Anyone with security clearance above a certain level has to be careful about what they share with unauthorized persons, even spouses and children. The work I do involves ongoing investigations, classified techniques, and information that could endanger operations if it became public knowledge." Agent Murphy had explained it to me during my first week on the job. The hardest part of intelligence work isn't the danger or the stress, it's the isolation. It's sitting at family dinners while people assume you're unsuccessful or dishonest, and not being able to defend yourself without violating federal law. "So you've been dealing with this for 3 years?" Danny asked. "Having us question your career, having Uncle Marcus make jokes about fake government jobs, having everyone assume you were either lying or working somewhere embarrassing." 3 years, I confirmed, and it's been difficult. Especially because I'm proud of what I do. I'm proud of the threats we've prevented, the lives we've saved, the security we've provided. But I couldn't share any of that pride with the people who matter most to me. Aunt Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue that had appeared from somewhere. We made you carry all of that alone. That's what the job requires, I said simply. When you choose to work in intelligence or threat assessment, you accept that your personal relationships will be complicated by necessary secrecy. Uncle Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. Alex, I owe you more than an apology. I've been making jokes about government waste and fake agencies for years, not knowing that my own nephew was doing work that matters more than anything the rest of us do. That's not true, I protested. You're all successful in your own fields. You all contribute something important to society. But we're not preventing assassinations, Jessica said quietly. We're not stopping terrorists from killing senators. When I go to work tomorrow, I'll be planning marketing campaigns for luxury watches. You go to work and analyze threats to national security. The comparison seemed to embarrass her, and I realized that my family's perception of their own careers had been affected by learning the truth about mine. They'd spent years assuming I was the unsuccessful one, the family member who couldn't find meaningful work. Now they were questioning whether their own achievements measured up to literal life-saving activities. Every job matters, I said firmly. The economy needs marketing experts and surgeons and financial advisors and lawyers. Society functions because people excel in all kinds of different fields. What I do is important, but it's not more important than what you do. It's just different. Danny looked at me skeptically. Come on, Alex. You stopped a terrorist attack today. You saved a United States senator. You can't honestly say that's equivalent to my graduate research on soil contamination. Your research on soil contamination could prevent cancer in thousands of people over the next 50 years, I replied. Just because my work is dramatic and makes the news doesn't mean it's more valuable than research that protects public health. But even as I said it, I could see that the dynamic in our family had shifted permanently. My relatives would never again question whether my work was legitimate or important. They would never again make jokes about my mysterious government job or suggest I needed to find a real career. Which, honestly, felt like a relief. For 3 years, I'd endured their skepticism and condescension while knowing I couldn't defend myself. Family gatherings had become exercises in patience, tests of my ability to remain silent while people I loved made assumptions about my character and competence. There's something else, I said, pulling out my phone to show them the messages I'd received throughout the evening. Director Chen wants to see me in Washington tomorrow morning. This investigation is going to continue for months, maybe years. Trevor Hutchins mentioned other cells, other threats. My work is about to become much more demanding and much more dangerous. The room went quiet as that implication sank in. They were just beginning to understand what I really did for a living, and now I was telling them it was about to become even more intense. Does that mean more situations like tonight? Bradley asked. Probably, I admitted. Domestic terrorism is evolving, and the people planning these attacks are getting more sophisticated. What happened today might be the beginning of a larger campaign against federal officials. Grandma stood up slowly, using her walker to cross the room to where I was sitting. She placed a weathered hand on my shoulder and looked directly into my eyes. Are you going to be safe? She asked simply. It was the question they all wanted to ask but were afraid to voice. Now that they understood my work was real and dangerous, they were confronting the possibility that their family member might not come home from work someday. I'm going to be as safe as I can be, I said honestly. The work I do involves risk, but I'm trained for it, and I work with the best people in the world. We take every precaution possible. But there's still a risk, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, there's still a risk. She nodded slowly, then leaned down to hug me tightly. Then I'm proud of you for doing it anyway. As my grandmother held me, I felt the weight of 3 years of family skepticism finally lifting from my shoulders. They would never again doubt my career or question my choices. They understood now that I hadn't been lying or hiding failure. I'd been protecting secrets that could save lives. But more than that, they understood that the work I did mattered in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. The cousin they'd dismissed as unsuccessful was actually standing between democracy and those who would destroy it. And tomorrow morning, I would go back to Washington and continue doing exactly that. Now, Grandma said, releasing me from the hug and heading toward the kitchen. Who wants pie? I saved Alex a piece of everything. Some things, at least, would never change. No matter how dramatic the day had been, no matter what national security crises I'd helped resolve, I was still her grandson who needed to eat more and worry less. And honestly, after the day I'd had, pie sounded perfect. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.